when you say I know, and you're asking the question, how do you know what you know? That is what is known as epistemology. This is a super big and deep topic, and most people don't realize that. This one's a little bit tricky to get through, and it's the number one thing, because people will say, oh, you think it's true? Oh, you got warm and fuzzies about the Book of Mormon, therefore it's true, right? And so it's kind of like, you're just going based off your feelings. And I actually don't believe you just go off your feelings. Remember, I said there were 5 witnesses.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Midnight Mormons. I'm your host, Cardon Ellis, and today we are joined in the studio by Brad Witbeck, Jacob Hanson, and Kwaku L. And we're actually going to tackle a very important question, a very important issue. Lately, we've been hearing a lot of this. Well, how do you know the church is true? And the common adage that I know the church is true, said during testimony meetings, is under attack. And there's all this newfound academic guilt over the phraseology. But Jacob here has a theory that you should say it. You should know exactly what you mean when you say it. And if you don't, he will disabuse you of any idea that it's not true. Jacob, go.
All righty. So we all hear people say that I know that the church is true. And there's sort of a reaction to that. Kwaku, you were saying before when we were kind of talking, what's your reaction when you hear that sometimes?
Well, I don't. What is that like? Well, like, what does that mean if someone says, "I know the church is true"? Like, I know that the church exists. It is objectively true that the church exists. Yes. Or does it mean that I believe that the principles of the church work, whereas the church is now true because these are true principles that actually have some lifeblood in them? Like, what does it mean? And I think we tried to talk about this with RFM, and he was like, well, it's boring to talk about, things that matter. But
I'm genuinely asking, when you said, I know the church is true, what did you mean by that?
Sean, I'll be happy to answer this, but I think this is getting into really boring stuff.
Well, I
I'm just saying, I think it is. I don't think this is going to be widely appreciated.
I believe that when people say, I know the church is true, it's a colloquial for expressing their devotion. And it can mean something different
to different people.
Yeah.
I totally agree. I think that we're getting to a point with language where it's just English is weird. And when we see all of these terms being redefined all over the place, that as we have people like start applying that into their religious lives and see like, okay, what does it mean when we say, I know this, I know the church is true? What does it mean to know? What does it mean to think it's true? Like, all of those become questions, and no one has the exact same definition.
So when you say I know, and you're asking the question, how do you know what you know? That is what is known as epistemology. Okay? Epistemology is the philosophical exploration of the concept of knowledge, your theory of knowledge, right? And so this is a super big and deep topic. And most people don't realize that. And so they kind of expect like this really quick answer, and it isn't so simple. And so what I want to do today, I kind of wanted to go over and discuss sort of my framing of this, and as I have explored this, and sort of an epistemology that I think is consistent with the gospel, and why I think you can say that you know that the church is true and what you mean by that. So first of all, okay, anybody here seen The Matrix?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Who hasn't?
Okay.
Dude?
So The Matrix is actually a play on a profound epistemological question. It's how do you know something is real? Because when you're saying I know something, what you're saying really is, this is real to me, right? Like, I know that you're sitting next to me. That is the reality that I'm experiencing. What's real to me is that you're here, right? So I'll say, I know that Brad is sitting next to me right now. But if you've watched The Matrix, you've stumbled into the question of, do you really know? Now, what do you mean by know? Do you mean by do you know? Are you saying 100% rational certainty? Because if that's what you mean, guess what? You know nothing, essentially, except for the fact that you exist. Now, before you think that's... Go ahead.
Even the 100% secular rational certainty is unattainable.
It is unattainable. That's the point of the Matrix.
Ask any physics major.
Yes.
100, it's impossible.
Go, and Descartes discovered this. The great philosopher René Descartes discovered this in like the 1600s, 1700s, I can't remember which. And he was his whole thing was this. He's like, well, what can we really be totally certain of? And he basically came down to his famous statement that everyone hears now, I think, therefore I am. What he meant by that was that because I think, I must exist. And that is something.
And you can know that you exist, but
Yes.
it's hard to know much beyond that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that is the great sort of, that's the thing. So if you're saying you know something, what most people are saying is they are actually saying they have a certain level of confidence that something is true. Like, yeah, I have a 99.99999% confidence that Brad is sitting here next to me.
And you know that because you can see me here, you can hear me here. We've like physically hit each other. We know that each other are in the room. And so it kind of comes back to your threshold of evidence for things and what you count as like valid evidence.
Bingo. Exactly.
Okay.
So here's the thing. I like to use this. So in the church, we have this idea of the truth shall be by 2 or 3 witnesses shall kind of the truth be established, right? So if I'm sitting here with you guys and somebody comes in and says, hey, there was a car accident earlier today, and they describe what happened in the car accident. Right? And then another person walks in and they tell the exact same story. And then another person walks in and they tell the exact same story. As each of these witnesses come in, you become more and more confident that that thing that you don't have a direct access to, let's say.
But what about mass
real.
hysteria? Mass hysteria.
Yes. And there are issues with that. But again, you're not at 100% confidence.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you have greater and greater reason to be confident because of these witnesses.
And enough of influence on your behavior probably so that you're going to avoid that street because you believe those people. So if you have somewhere to go, you're going to avoid that place where the crash happened.
Yes. So I asked myself this question, and everyone needs to ask it. So what are the things that give you confidence that something is true? What are these witnesses to the truth?
What are your metrics?
Yeah, essentially. So like for me, let's just start with what's simple. Like I see you here.
Yeah.
My eyes act as a witness to me that Brad is here. However, can your eyes deceive you?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we've all seen the butter faces. You know, Cardon, what the freak? You got straight there.
So what you're saying is we live in a simulation.
Yeah. So that are you
Maybe.
100? Are we 100% certain that we don't live in a simulation?
NPCs, man.
I'm telling you,
A lot
it
of
is.
NPCs walking around.
There are all sorts
Have
of movies.
scales.
Yeah.
No,
Well, I thought about this. How would you? Okay, so you know that you exist. You know, you think therefore you are, but you don't think for Brad. Brad could very well not be a human. You don't know.
Yeah.
You don't for sure know
There's
that
a
he
chance
is.
I'm a lizard person.
So I can't say, just so those people remember that say you can't say you know the church is true, you can tell them, well, I don't know that Brad is not a lizard person.
no.
It's true.
And you should chase him down on a New York street and ask him repeatedly and see if he denies it. And when he doesn't, it will become a meme.
Well, my favorite thing to do is this is what I would do with
Donald
my Christian evangelical friends. They wanted to argue stuff, and I do it with my atheist friends too. We've created a nebulous group of authorities that have just determined what's true and false for us. And so you'll notice any article will just said, well, studies show. And what studies show means is one dude at a university you don't care about did a study with a sample group of people whose names we don't know, whose biases we don't know, whose livelihoods we don't know.
Probably a small sample group too.
Participated in a study that was led by a person whom we also don't know, and he declared that now a fact must exist.
So
We know
And those facts
nothing
are
about it.
conveniently in line with whatever organization, generally left-leaning governmental, that happens to be supporting and paying for the study.
okay.
And I would say the same.
Because don't forget, cigarettes never caused emphysema
This-
for the first 25
this
years
ties
of the
into
cigarette
something.
industry.
This ties into something important, you guys. You are talking about authority. Authority is another witness of the truth. And we all actually use this, just so you guys know.
Yeah.
Okay? Like if I have 12 of the best brain surgeons in the world come in here and they give me advice on what to do with my brain cancer and all of them say the same thing, I, as someone who knows basically nothing about brain cancer and how to handle it, I'm going to listen to those surgeons, right? I'm going to say that I have a level of confidence that what they're saying is true based on the authority that they have and based on their character and their trustworthiness and their experience, all that kind of stuff. Now, but is authority, again, it raises your confidence level, but there are other things that raise your confidence level. So so I'm just going to go through. I have what I call 5 witnesses. These are the best things that I could describe. So first, and we're going to talk more about this one, but the first one is
Oliver Cowdery. Oh wait, no, wrong witness.
Is intuition. Okay, your intuition.
Oh, your gut.
Okay, and I'll explain why that actually is critically important and what I mean by it. Number 2 is sensory data. Like you see it, you touch it, you smell it, all that kind of stuff. The next one is...
I must lick the word of God.
I lick, therefore I feel, or I lick, therefore I am.
Exactly. So I can say it's true because I've seen it. I can say that something is true because of reason. Okay? That is the organization of the sensory data that you have and or just the process of logic.
Anything mathematical.
Anything mathematical. Yeah. Reason is the... basically, you're taking premises, and then from those, you're drawing conclusions. Even though you don't necessarily have the sensory data, you can actually line things up that way. Mathematics is essentially just reason. Okay. The next one, number 4, is moral outcomes. Now, this one's a little bit interesting. We would talk about in the church, our language for it is fruits, right?
Yeah. Okay.
How do you know that something is true in a moral sense? Like, if something functions, you can say to a certain extent that it is true in the sense that it does what it says it was going to do. It produces the outcome that you wanted, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's another way in which we can be confident that something is true, is if it works. Okay. Now, the other one, the last one, is authority, right? We already talked about that. So here's the thing. I have, and if there's more, I'm not saying that my model is complete, but I say, holy cow, I have all of these different things that I can utilize to know the true nature of reality. But if I were to gouge out one of my eyes, I would have lost to a certain extent the full picture of reality that my eyes could see. If you get rid of some of these witnesses, you begin to deny them.
Right.
You begin to stop being able to see the full picture of the world. If all I rely on is empirical data.
And then you get the blind men with the elephant.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
That's an entire talk on epistemology that they did, because you can't see the full picture. And what a lot of people do, secular people, we've adopted a particular epistemology and a lens through which we look at the world, where we limit what we can see because we've been told that only certain forms of evidence
are valid. Yeah.
Right.
And what's funny is this is not a new concept, okay?
Yeah.
Paul, he's talking to I believe he's talking in Corinth, and these people are the rationalist Greeks.
Yeah.
And he says, but as it is written, eye hath not seen, nor ear heard, neither has entered into the heart of man the things which God hath prepared for them that love him. But God hath revealed it to them, unto us by his Spirit. For the Spirit searcheth all things, yea, the deep things of God, which things we also speak, not in the words which man's wisdom teacheth, but which the Holy Ghost teacheth, comparing spiritual things with spiritual. But the natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness unto him. Neither can he know them, for they are spiritually discerned.
So what you're suggesting is that as a widespread society, we have, that used to be Judeo-Christian, we've adopted the language of our oppressors, basically, by tossing out other senses that need to be included in our epistemology of truth. And for those that are just tuning in right now, epistemology is basically, how do you know what you know? How can you claim to say, I know something?
And how can you be, and by know, I mean, how can you be more certain? Because at some point you say, even though you don't have 100% certainty, you will use the language, I know, because you have a level of confidence that is at a certain height that you will use that language.
And that's what I think is important to consider with knowing. I think when you know something, that you are confident enough in that thing that it affects the way that you act.
That's a great way of putting it.
Right? Because
I like that.
If you're confident enough that there was a car crash on that street, that you then go there. It doesn't matter if you really know that happened. 3 other people told you, there was a car crash there, so you're going to avoid it, right?
Well, also, let's identify the problem a little bit better here, because we're 12 minutes into this, but I don't feel like we've correctly identified the problem. To me, the whole reason we're having this epistemology argument is because secular atheism has basically come in and said, of the 5 ways that you can know things, just right off the bat, 2 aren't valid.
And which are those?
Yeah, moral outcomes. They'll say that just because it works, you can't say that it's true. But if you're seeking moral truth, I don't know how do you evaluate if something is morally true unless you say it produces the moral outcome, the good outcome.
That's like saying you can't do proofs in math.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying. It seems like nowadays, this is the weird problem with all of these supposed academics, all right, is that they say, for example, that, well, let's say there was an imaginable fruit out there, the oceanic blossom, and there's an ancient script that says the oceanic blossom will cure bronchitis, let's just say, right? Well, all of the modern so-called atheist anti-Mormons would come out and say, oh, well, that fruit doesn't exist. Well, in the script, it says if you go to the ocean, you'll find it on the shore. You know what I'm saying? Well, you can't go to the ocean because it doesn't exist. Well, if it did, could I go there? And if I saw it myself, well, then you'd be fooling yourself because we know it doesn't exist. And that would be a mass hallucination.
They presuppose.
Well, they just presuppose and they don't allow you to go there and see if it exists. And if they send their guy that one time once and he does see it, he says that he was just hallucinating or it was a trick.
Okay. So this is where I want to go into something that is probably the one that they've really rejected more than any other. And that is this concept of, I'm going to call it intuition here. Maybe I'm using secular language to describe it. It's something that we might call the spirit.
Okay,
yes. Cool. It's something that we might call a spiritual knowledge of something. Okay. So I'm actually going to kind of go through because this one's a little bit tricky to get through. And it's the number one thing because people will say, oh, you think it's true. Oh, you got warm and fuzzies about the Book of Mormon. Therefore it's true. Right. And so it's kind of like, you're just going based off your feelings. And I actually don't believe you just go off your feelings. Remember, I said there are 5 witnesses. And if you jump on any one of those, like if you're an evangelical and you just jump on authority of the Bible, and literally all you use is the witness of the authority of a particular interpretation of the Bible, you're going to be lost. So I'm going to go and talk, though, about a little bit here. This idea is that of kind of intuition that we exist. So I believe that all of these things actually emerge from our intuitions. They emerge.
The rest of oh my gosh.
All the other tools.
Revelation is really the rock.
Okay, now you're getting it.
Okay,
the Spirit,
cool.
From the Spirit emerges all the rest. I put it this way. So imagine that, like, if you have a tool, you have a shovel, okay? You then can dig in the ground, and in the ground you find a rope, and then you use that rope, which is another tool, to climb up a mountain, and then on the top of the mountain there's a telescope, and you can use that telescope to look at the moon. It's from one tool emerges the next. So I had 5 things I talked about. So we talk about our sensory data.
Okay.
Here's the crazy thing about sensory data. Sensory data does not exist in the ether. It acts on you. You are seeing something. Right. There's another thing in the equation here. It's the you.
Yeah, and your brain has to interpret the stuff that your eyes are seeing, that your nose is smelling.
The us, the self, the consciousness, whatever you want to use, the spirit, the intelligence, whatever it is, sensory data has to act on you. You are actually the most fundamental. I think, therefore I am. We're getting back to that kind of stuff. So I don't say that because it's the most fundamental, it's the most accurate by itself. You're just going with your gut on everything without using reasoning and denying, other things like what the authorities say and all that. That doesn't work, right? So, but some things are what we'll call self-evident.
That's been my biggest frustration is the fact that modern secularism has denied to me, not the supremacy, but the power, the usefulness, the necessity, the validity of self-evidence, which is what is the most useful tool of what? Taking away our constitutional rights from tyrants, destroying social fabric, because the Constitution literally says we hold these truths to be what?
Self-evident.
All men are created equal. And in the Book of Mormon, what does it say? It literally says, all of the moon and the stars and the celestial bodies in their orbits, all of the water, the fishes, the beauty of this earth, maintain that what?
There is a God.
That there is a God. We have forced ourselves, somehow academics, like I had this awesome evolutionary biologist say the greatest ruse ever perpetuated upon the human mind is that the earth took billions of years to form. He said, we've convinced people to override the self-evident truths that you look around and see every day with the senses that have been evolutionarily honed in order to understand your world, if you're coming from a secular perspective, and say, I cannot believe my lying eyes. I must believe a truth that is not self-evident and can only be an acquired taste through what? Shame-based, conformity-based academia in the modern Western world.
And what's interesting with that, Cardon, this is something I've been running into recently where people have complaints about like, well, you can't really know that there's a God because it's an unfalsifiable claim. You can't prove that there isn't. And it's like, yeah, but that's the same with like abiogenesis. That's the same thing with like the Big Bang Theory itself is kind of an unfalsifiable claim here. Like, I think we should just let each other have our unfalsifiable.
So
yeah.
So I want to
unverifiable
I want to real quick hit on this one before we get away from it.
And then we got to hit Kwaku.
You had said about the whole rejection of the self-evident principles, what I call it. There are some things that are self-evident, and that's kind of our starting point, and they're experiential in nature. Okay? And that's a big deal. What do we talk about? We don't tell people, hey, come in here, everyone, to our church. Like, we're going to give you this really great argument. Doesn't mean we're not going to give arguments. But fundamentally, what we ask people to do is we say, come and see. We say, come and have an experience with God. And this stuff will actually become evident to the self. It will become witness to your spirit from the Spirit, to use our language.
And that is exactly what Jesus did too.
Yes. And that, so the rejection, but the thing is what people don't realize is that even reason itself is based on deeper intuitive building blocks. It's built on a foundation of intuitions about causality, intuitions about individuation, about the orderliness of the universe, the idea that the future will, if you have a pattern that's repeating from the past, that it will continue into the future. These are all intuitive things that reason itself is actually built upon. And to use an example, even mathematics. So this is a really crazy example when I found it. If I were to ask you, what is 5 times 11? Who's got it? 55. You didn't have to do any reasoning, right? But if I asked you what 5 divided by 11 is, you would probably have to get out a piece of paper and you'd have to write out your work.
Not if you don't subscribe to Common Core, which is a superior form of doing long division, which means you're part of the future instead of the patriarchal, colonial, toxically masculine past.
Right on.
What the freak was that, Cardon?
Cardon has some opinions on that. But here's the crazy thing. So when you actually break down a math problem, what are you doing? You are breaking down something into intuitive steps.
Okay.
1 + 1 = 2. 1 is an intuitive concept that you have, plus 2. So you actually, when you reason, you are breaking apart something into its intuitive constituent parts and then playing with it. But again, what's most fundamental here? The intuitive is the most fundamental. Again, going to say this 1,000 times because you guys are hearing, you're going, well, that doesn't mean the Book of Mormon is true just because you have warm and fuzzies. I'm like, I know you have to use the full thing of your model, but there is it is most fundamental does not mean it is the most accurate by itself.
And actually, I think this ties into some of the things that we learn about how we can understand the truth in the gospel, because we learn line upon line, precept on precept. We learn by each intuitive, tiny piece of the problem as we go up, right? And we stack those onto each other to gain the knowledge that we have, right? I think that's why we see parables comparing things to seeds that then grow, and these tiny minuscule things like a mustard seed, freaking small.
I see a mischievous smirk on Kwaku's face.
So I want to talk about it's going to sound like this is a derail, but I promise it's not. Have you guys heard of the doctrine of the twin flame?
No.
Oh, is this Elizabeth Clare Prophet stuff?
Well, it's actually, this is like kind of Hermetic stuff. This goes back way, way far. But the doctrine of the twin flame has been interpreted in many, many ways. But the most popular way is that it's Adam and Eve, okay? And if you have two flames that are burning at the same time, oftentimes you'll find that they dance like in mirror of each other, right? Like, so that's where the twin flames come from. And it's this theory that each person has their twin flame, the same candle they're supposed to be burning with, right? This is where it's a spiritual kind of love.
Soulmates.
Right. You call them soulmates.
Okay. Yin and yang.
Now, what's interesting is there's a lot of these ancient Hermetic teachers who said that when we destroy the belief in spirit, we will destroy the doctrine of the twin flame and the candles will be burned out and there will be no more love. And it sounds kind of weird, but when you think about a society that rejects the idea of God and rejects the idea of spirit and believes they can only operate their view of the world on empirical data or empirical evidence or whatever the blue checks say or the authorities say, you create a shallow world.
Yes.
And then if you look at how we are mating people together by ignoring the twin flames, you have the shallow, sad LA dating culture, which is the 45-year-old man. Well, she's 19, she's hot, she's got nice boobs, and she's not addicted to drugs. That's all I require.
And she's thinking he actually has money and can afford sustaining me.
And
so it becomes transactional, shallow garbage.
And we've treated each other as transactional objects.
And
Yes.
Because we don't have the spirit.
Yeah.
And the moral...
And so this affects love.
Yes.
This affects all of those. But here's the thing. One last thing is this. Nobody wants that. Like, when you start off, when you're a teenager, starting to understand how your emotional feelings work in regard to other people, you want the twin flame feeling.
Yeah.
Nobody really wants to live their life only by the data that other people give them. You go by your heart. So it's BS that modern atheists say the only way to be productive is to go by empirical evidence, when that's not how people work. That's not how we were, dare I say, designed.
And
Yeah, it is a thing that I think we see the evidence of right now, right? Where you see the rising divorce rates. The more the secular the society becomes, the less people seem to love each other.
The candle has been blown out.
Well, and I always tell people, like, use the scientific method that you know. If that's the language that you speak, is the secular scientific method, that you have a hypothesis and you design an experiment around that hypothesis, and then you glean results and test that experiment and then show that experiment to others to see if it's repeatable, right? Okay, fine. Here's my hypothesis. You'll get closer to God, have a better life, live longer, and be happier if you join the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and develop an independent and individual relationship with God and let that guide your life. Okay. And according to the Book of Mormon, this is how you do it. The 5 primary answers: pray, read your scriptures, go to church, do your calling, all that other crap, right? Well, do those. I'd call it the 2-week challenge when I was on my mission. I'd say, don't believe me, just literally try it for a couple of weeks. And if you don't see a drastic change in the positivity of your life, the longevity of your life as projected by your medical doctor standing in front of you, testing your blood, your weight, your BMI, if all of that exponentially does not increase, then fine, give me the book back. I'll come and I'll pick it up. You know what I'm saying? Because what Kwaku says here, the arrogance of man has kicked in never more than it has in the past 100 years in the Western society. As God, through the Enlightenment and through Christianity, inspired us to develop these scientific inventions, technologies, and principles, we have used it to think all of a sudden somehow that we're cool, and that this little bit that we've observed in the past 100 years is so much better than the first 10,000 years that humans have been around and on record, okay? And just because they use a slightly different word for the thing, just because the secularists want to say, oh, intuition. Oh, it's intuition. But we know that's unverifiable because there hasn't been a Harvard study on it. And by the way, that's never going to happen because Harvard has never wanted to actually say Christianity's got anything right with it. You know what I'm saying? Since we use a different word, You know what I'm saying?
And that
We
sample
toss it
bias,
out.
that sample bias is so real. Like the idea that like, oh man, we've sent out a survey and 99% of people said that they love responding to surveys. Yeah, because the rest are in the trash.
So
you know, like there's this bias to the data that we have because of what people are willing to study that I think we need to.
So I want to hit on.
It should give us pause in what we think about we're accepting from other authorities.
So
Yes.
I want to hit on something. Kwaku hit on something interesting there, and it's and it goes back kind of to what you were saying about kind of what's at the crux of this. Secular society has sucked the soul out of mankind.
Yeah.
They have said you don't have a soul. Actually, what's funny, the most profound
And
philosophical...
now we have to prove we have a soul using their rhetoric, their vocabulary, and their institutions and methodologies that don't allow for the premise of the soul. Therefore, you can't get back to it. And it's the epitome of adopting the language of your accusers.
Yes, and I would say, have you ever read C.S. Lewis has a great book called The Abolition of Man. Everyone needs to read it. And by the way, it's basically on this whole topic. It's on the idea of what is happening because he saw the secularization coming.
Yeah.
And he said, there's this famous line from it. He's talked about men without chests. We're going to create a society of men without chests. Oh. And it's this idea
That's
of...
not Kwaku.
Yeah, no. Jim. But what he was talking about
Is your heart.
is your heart. We're sucking the soul out of human beings and we're seeing them in purely materialistic terms. And here's the reality. That's not true. You're not a meat computer. You are not just a bunch of material. And the thing is, everyone deep down knows that. And once you reject that premise, that you are not just a meat computer, your eyes, it's like you just turned on a whole other eye that you can see through, that the secularists don't even acknowledge. And there's an entire world that opens up that is what the gospel is meant to speak to.
And do you know what's cool? Is that's kind of a faith-based principle. That deep down, it's about faith. You only have faith. Like I like how it says it in lectures on faith. The way that it kind of puts this is, I guess a more modern way to say this is, you turn on a light switch because you believe it's going to make the light turn on. You wouldn't press a light switch if you didn't think it was going to make that difference, right? And so we have the actions that we take in our lives are based around the things that we think are going to happen from them.
We place our trust in them. Faith is not some belief without evidence. It's where I place my chips.
Yeah.
It is, I have enough confidence in this, so now I'm going to begin to conform my behavior accordingly.
And so to get rid of the language of our accusers that Cardon is talking about, I find it funny when I tell people who are secular that they have faith. And they're like, no, the faith is like a dirty word to them. They're like, no, I don't have faith in these things. I'm like, yeah, you absolutely do.
It's just in a different institution with different priests. Therapists are no different than Catholic priests in the 14th century in a world where Catholicism was the government. Like a 15th century Holy Roman Empire.
You're sounding like a Scientologist right now, Cardon.
No, but
I just did an episode on the psychologists now are the secular priesthood of our day.
You know, and what's funny is they're just as fallible. I had an argument with a Christian the other day who was lamenting how, Christianity's got it all figured out, and that this secularized left-wing government, he was a total right-winger, right? And I said, you want to know what, bro? You don't have it all figured out. And you want to know why I think modern Christianity, mainstream Christianity at least, is full of crap? I'm going to go to one of your conventions. And I'm going to talk to the top 5 pastors, and I'm going to say, does God smile upon dances? And is dancing becoming of a child of God? Should churches hold dances? And watch all 5 of the pastors freak out and all give you different evidences of how their view on dancing is correct or incorrect. Some saying you should be shaken in the chapels, while others saying it's footloose and you're going to hell for doing it. And every one of them will all say, the authority of the Bible and my interpretation thereof is solid, watertight, and the only one you should listen to or else you're going to hell. But guess what?
They won't say my interpretation thereof. They'll just say
that's
the
what
Bible.
The Bible says.
Yeah.
And then to make it worse, after you show that they all have a different opinion on it, they'll all agree on one thing as settled theological science, that the Book of Mormon isn't true.
Oh yeah,
they can't agree on anything
mainstream
except for
See, but it's totally different with us. We don't argue that we don't make our claims purely on authority. We actually invite people. This is actually a crazy thing, and I didn't realize how unique this is that our church literally just says, come here and have an experience with God. Come and get to know him, and you will know for yourself that is true.
One of the funniest things that the evangelicals would say to me when I was doing more dialogues with them is, nowhere in the Bible does it say you should ask God to tell you if things are true.
Oh my God.
And I was like, okay, you guys are taking the position that you shouldn't ask. Like, you guys have really gone off the rails.
Yeah.
But let me just say, I think our modern secular world, I think that we inherited that from mainstream Christianity. I firmly believe that.
Yeah.
I firmly
Interesting.
believe they set the precedence for all those things. And we don't have too much time, but let me just, you went orange. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, what
God's
happened?
like, this is the chosen one
Donald
now. So here's one. If you, when missionaries go and you meet the Christians and they're like, well, the Bible is perfect. It's the word of God and such, the Book of Mormon is false. And we say, well, it was not, it's true as far as it's translated correctly. And they freak out by that word because it's like translated perfectly. Ask any of them. Name one translator.
William Tyndale.
Name what? No, because he translated the canon that was already available.
Oh,
He
out of
just
the Vulgate.
translated it into
Yeah.
English. Yeah.
Okay.
Give me one freaking monk. Name one who was handling the papyri and was like beep-a boop bapa. It was putting in. Name one.
Why was he Italian?
Because he is in my mind. He's gonna. Put
No, he was Zulu Italian. He was like bibbidi boppy booba. You were just like, right?
So ask them that,
Yeah.
and you will see them. They don't even know the people that they're translated from. Not even the original documents, from the copies of the copies of the copies of the copies of the original. Translated that into what we have now. They don't even know the people who did it. They don't know their lives. They don't know their stories. They know nothing. And now that nebulous, silent, no-name, random monk in Europe's authority is like the most important authority that they could ever go by. So it is appealing to the worst kind of authority I have ever heard in my life. When we're just saying, F it, ask God. Just ask him, all right?
Because who's a better authority? Who's a better authority? That random nebulous monk or God our Father?
Yeah.
Sound like one of them crazy Mormons.
Yeah.
And that's-
no, I mean,
but there's a difference here. So Cardon, you speak Spanish. We both served in Argentina.
Con fluidez.
Yes.
Sabe.
Che loco. No, so there in Spanish, there's actually two words for to know. One is saber and the other is conocer. So what's really interesting is, and I ended up looking this up because I wasn't sure. What does Moroni's promise use? Does it use saber or conocer? So real quick, saber means to know, like intellectually, like in your mind, like rationally.
I love your wildly Americanized pronunciation. Yeah, so saber means that
Saber?
like
Saber.
like you sound like a sister missionary that
Hey,
just got dumped out of the MTC.
I've been out. I've been off the mission for a while. But real quick,
You mean to say saber?
saber.
Okay, cool.
Yes.
Rock on.
There it is.
So I'm sorry, I'm Americanizing it so they can understand it. So saber is to know with your mind, right? It's like intellectual knowledge. Conocer is like, I know you personally, right? And so the scriptures say that you will know, like Moroni's promise. Guess what word it uses?
Conocer.
Conocer. It says you will know the truth of all things the way you know a friend. And what's funny is that that is, and Jesus, when he in the Bible says to know you is life eternal, those languages, just so we know,
The Reina
Spanish
Valera is conocer?
is, yes, in Spanish it's conocer, which I believe, and someone could fact check me on this, but I believe if you go back, those languages had those differentiations. And so the idea that Jesus was trying to communicate was that we will come to know God not through sort of this rational process, but through this more holistic kind of familiarity
Interesting.
that we can have. And that really, when you get up and bear your testimony, bring this back full circle to the beginning, we're talking about how can you say that you know something?
Yeah.
Do you know God? Have you ever encountered God? You're being asked to testify of what you know, like, I know Brad.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you're saying when you say that. And if you say that the church is true, you're saying you are bearing a spiritual witness of the spiritual truth that this church is Christ's church. We're saying this church is true. Like another way you can use the word true is like to be aligned with something, right? Like true north.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like an alignment. So what we say that the church is true, we're saying that the church is Christ's. We're saying it aligns with him. I know through my own personal experience with the church, conocer, that the church is what it claims to be. That I think is the way that we're supposed to talk about these things.
However, they're going to say your heart is deceitful above all things, so you shouldn't trust any of those witnesses, and you just trust whatever the local pastor says.
Then why does the book of John literally say, if any of you lack wisdom, and it specifically uses the word wisdom?
I mean, James.
I'm sorry. You're right. Santiago, Denver. You know what I'm saying? No, actually, it's not. No, it's Santiago 2. Sorry.
Yeah.
James
1:5.
James 1:5. Gosh.
Yeah,
And if you lack wisdom, let him ask of
scriptorium.
God to give to all men liberally and upbraideth not.
But then 6. Let him ask in faith, nothing wavering. For
Yeah.
he that wavereth is like a wave of the sea, driven with the wind and tossed.
Paul's way more important. I don't even know James.
The problem is, and I pointed this out in a debate that I did with some of the guys at Apologia Church, that epistemology means God himself could literally walk into this room and say, you got your interpretation wrong. And you know what they'd say? That wasn't God. Because my Bible and my interpretation of it does not match with what he just said. So that couldn't have been God.
Yeah,
literally, God himself cannot convince them that they're wrong.
He is not their authority.
Exactly,
They trust
he's
those
not.
nameless monks over
You're right.
God.
Yes.
Actually,
is
I just
terrifying.
I've just realized right now that all of the modern evangelicals, the Calvinists that hate us, all the people in these universities that are trying to debate us all the time have created a huge epistemological and logical problem in the second coming. In the second coming, there will be many things that are prophesied, that we will see these angels, that we will see Jesus Christ returning, and so on and so forth. But they won't believe anything that's not already in the book. So when Jesus actually appears to them and says, I am
They're going to
Jesus,
call him Satan.
they're literally going to deny him and say, well, it didn't say that you would appear
They will
at this
accept
part on earth.
They
at
will
this
accept
time.
nothing more than nothing.
Their interpretation, real
I'm
quick,
kidding.
just
It's sad.
their
It's really sad.
interpretation of. So what's funny is it's an overemphasis on the fifth witness that I talked about, authority.
Yeah.
Right? They have accepted the authority of that truth is determined by what those monks and what my pastor and what these authorities have told me is the proper interpretation of scripture. And what's funny, the secular people do the same thing.
Yeah.
With the
This is where we
academic
inherited
people.
that mindset
And
from.
you're right.
And the academic
How
false
so? How so?
priesthood.
We inherited
They-
it
That
because
way.
we set up Western society to say, these are the thinkers, and when the thinking has been done, you follow. So when we started setting up our first colleges in the United States, these were Christian seminaries. And the exact formula of how we verify information is the same method that those Christian seminaries set up, which is another reason why Joseph Smith pissed people off. Because he was like,
Dude, that's deep, Kwaku.
hate to tell you, God told me you guys were wrong. What? And you're an abomination.
And here's the thing. Here's the thing about it.
Yeah.
I don't think it had to go this bad, but it did because of people's desire for power, right?
Well, yeah.
Because over time, they saw the ability to get rid of these other witnesses so that they can be the sole witness people rely on
Yes.
and become that power, right?
You
Brett,
can
and
you
think-
can tell a ton about a person when you find out what witnesses they think are legit out of those 5 that I talked about,
Yeah.
and which ones they don't.
Epistemological physiognomy.
The epistemological framework. Yeah. No, but that, I mean, you can almost predict if they're an atheist, they are going to value sense data, reason, and authority.
Right.
That's it.
And they're going to reject the other 2, right? If you're an evangelical Christian, especially a real hardcore Calvinist type, it's 100%
Authority
only on that.
Which makes you no different than a secularist who always starts every sentence with,
Exactly.
well, studies show,
Exactly.
and then
Yeah.
recites a bunch of garbage
it's their scripture.
from politically motivated universities that already knew the outcome of the studies before they started them to get the money.
Yeah, and this is what I was saying. And so now look at how it played out in the 19th, 18th, and 19th century, with the thinkers of the seminaries dictating how everyone must think. Whenever you said, I don't agree, you were met with contention, you were met with violence, and you were met with bullying. And what are the same institutions doing right now? And when you say, hey, I disagree. On my podcast I'm filming in my garage from Indianapolis that only has 12,000 subscribers. Oh crap, the blue checks have come after me. The men of the cloth have come after me. It's the same thing. And now what we're seeing is all these churches have set themselves up for major failure because now they're going head to head with the LGBTQ movement, okay? And let me just say this, they're saying right now gender is the big fight and the big discussion between Christians and the secularists. And it's just very interesting that mainstream Christianity teaches that God is without body, parts, or passions, that father and male is only an allegorical term, and he doesn't literally have a gender, and they have the gall to tell this movement how to define gender when their God does not have a gender.
As per the Athanasian Creed.
Yes, they have set themselves up for failure every single time.
And this is a creed that's been
monks.
Yeah, this has been a creed that's been enforced through shame-based mechanisms. Yes. And what are the three things you listed so eloquently? I can't repeat them. But yeah, they've created their own problem here. And the only solution to it isn't a different class of erudites. It's not erudites and individualized spirituality in that church. Okay, keep going.
And this is kind of pulling me back to think, like, this is how they're not teaching anyone how to think, but they're teaching people what to think, because they are training people to think, okay, I am your authority and this is what you should be thinking. We're not going to talk about how you think, because how you think involves faith, I think.
But we in the church, we do believe in authority, but do you see how it's part of this holistic thing?
Yes, and it needs to be well-rounded. Otherwise, it's going to become lopsided, right? And so I think that faith is there to make up for the things that you don't know all the way. I
would say though that what faith is these things are granting you confidence. Faith is the moment that you place your works align and manifest where you have placed your bet. Faith is a principle of action, not of belief. Because remember, we're not 100% confident of anything. So I'm not 100% confident, but I'm placing my bet that this is true because I have sufficient reasons based on all of these witnesses to believe that it is, right? And so for me to kind of my kind of final thoughts on this are this. We have a beautiful message that came out of the Restoration. And it was, we want to know what is true.
Yes.
And God wants to reveal to us the truth. And he has given us endowments to help us to do that. He has given you a mind that thinks. He has given you a heart that feels. He has given you eyes that see. He has given us prophets that teach and testify of the truth. And all of this is acting on you. And depending on your state of affairs and what your heart wants, you can distort the revelation that God is trying to give to you. Okay? So at the end of the day, God has given you all of these things to help you to know the truth. And there are people out there who want you to turn off some of these endowments and say that they are not worthwhile just because some people do not properly integrate them. And so I want to encourage everyone that listens to recognize that we are a church that believes in the truth, that believes that we have been given endowments to find it, and that when you're never going to be 100%. That's fine. But at some point, you should say, I know that this is true because these 5 witnesses have given me sufficient confidence to say that.
You are confident enough that it changes your actions.
Yes.
Right? And that's why when I hear people be like, do you really know that? I'm like, they're at the pulpit. They're at church.
Yeah.
Of course they know.
Yeah.
You know?
Your actions manifest what you really believe.
Yeah.
Wow. Hardcore. Okay.
Lit.
It's getting hot in here.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure it's...
No, Cardon, dude. Don't take him off.
I'm pretty sure it's the Spirit, but then he started singing fornicative rap, at which point the Spirit was just like, no, let's run away. So this was absolutely amazing, and I think is one of the things on the bleeding tip of the spear right now for those that hate us and want to tear down faith and Christianity, and is probably one of the number one lessons that needs to be learned by Christians and members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in order to defend their own testimonies and the testimonies of their loved ones from the power of the accuser, which is the other cool word for the devil. So anyway,
Yeah.
we're out of here. This is Midnight Mormons. Hope you enjoyed this. See you guys in the next program.